July 28, 1945. Camp Whitfield, Louisiana. Two people woke that morning who would never forget it. Sergeant Walter Henning rose at 5 o'clock as he had every morning for the past 11 months. He dressed in the dark, the way soldiers learn to dress when light becomes a luxury they no longer trust. He stood before the small mirror above his wash basin and looked at his own reflection for exactly 3 seconds, which was as long as he allowed himself. The man staring back was someone he recognized less and less with each passing month. He walked to his desk and opened the administrative ledger and found the line he had signed the previous afternoon without reading it twice the way he signed everything now. Ice cream distribution. Block B. Thursday. 37 female internees. He had not asked himself how he felt about it. The Geneva Convention did not require feelings. It required signatures across the compound in the long wooden barracks of Block B. Margaret Lindqvist was already away. She went by Greta, 24 years old, a former student of communications at the University of Köln, conscripted into the Wehrmachtshelferinnen in the final desperate months of a collapsing war captured near the Rhine in April, when the front dissolved faster than anyone in command could explain. She had been processed through holding stations in France, loaded onto a transport ship with 60 other women, and delivered to a country so vast it made Germany feel like a single room inside a house she would never see again. Camp Whitfield sat inside a pine forest in northern Louisiana, surrounded by a humidity so thick the air itself seemed to carry weight. She had been here 91 days. She counted them the way a person counts the rungs of a ladder they cannot see the top of. She lay on her bunk a moment before rising, staring at the wooden planks above her. Somewhere outside, a bird called out a sound she did not recognize an American voice in a language she had not yet learned. She rose. She straightened her clothing. She prepared for another day of laundering uniforms in brutal summer heat. She did not know that before noon, something small and pink and impossibly cold would break something inside her that she would spend the rest of her life trying to understand. The morning passed the way mornings always passed at Camp Whitfield, with the careful rhythm of people who had learned that routine itself was a form of armor. Greta worked the laundry line, her hands moving through familiar motions, while her mind drifted somewhere quieter. She had trained herself to do this, to send the thinking part of herself away while her body handled the business of survival. Beside her worked Liesel Brandt, 19 years old, from Hamburg, a former telephone operator before the war, swallowed everything she had known. She was the youngest woman in Block B, and she carried that youth like something faintly dangerous. A brightness the older women resented and depended on in equal measure. Hannelore Kessler worked on the far side of the yard, repairing a section of fence under the watch of Corporal Helen Marsh. Hannelore was a practical woman from Bavaria, a former military supply driver who approached every task, including captivity, with the same methodical patience she had once used to navigate roads in total darkness. She spoke rarely. She observed constantly. And Ingrid Faber stood near the barracks wall with her arms folded, watching all of them. Ingrid was 55, the oldest woman in Block B, a former administrative officer in military logistics. She wore her age like rank, something that entitled her to opinions delivered as fact. She had served not out of fanaticism, but out of a conviction carried since childhood that order was a moral virtue, that structure was the foundation civilization stood on. She had watched that civilization collapse, and she had drawn one simple conclusion from the wreckage. The collapse was the fault of failure, not the fault of the thing that failed. Her eyes moved across the compound the way a person catalogs threats they are no longer certain they can name. It was just before 11 o'clock when the sound arrived. Greta heard it before she saw anything. A musical chime, metal striking metal at uneven intervals. She looked up from the laundry line with the wet shirt still in her hands, water dripping onto her boots. She did not notice the water. Private Dale Hutchins, 22 years old, from a small town in Ohio, pushed a gleaming white cart through the compound gate, whistling. He was broad-shouldered and sunburned, with the easy confidence of a young man who had grown up with enough to eat. Cold vapor rose from the surface of the cart, visible in the thick July air, like something refusing to belong to this place. Dale called out in the broken German he had been practicing for 3 weeks. Dessert. Who wants dessert? 37 women stopped moving. Not gradually, all at once, as if a single sound had been cut from the world. The compound went silent except for insects and the distant cry of that unfamiliar bird. Dale glanced at Corporal Marsh standing 10 feet away. She looked back at him without expression. She was watching the women, not him. He opened the lid of the cart. More cold vapor rolled out and dissolved into the heat. He reached in with a metal scoop and lifted it free. The color was wrong. That was Greta's first thought. Wrong for this place. Wrong for this year, wrong for everything that had been true since 1942. The ice cream on the scoop was pink, not pale, bright, almost violent, the color of something from before the war, from a world that had closed its doors years ago and stopped accepting visitors. Liesel took a step forward, then stopped. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Is this real? Dale laughed, unguarded, slightly confused by the question. Real as it gets. Come on, it's melting. Liesel walked forward the way a person approaches something that might be dangerous. She accepted the small bowl with both hands, the way you hold something fragile or valuable or alive. She lifted the spoon. Greta watched her open her mouth, watched the pink disappear, watched her eyes go wide. Then she watched something break. Liesel made a sound that was not a sob and not a gasp, but something living between the two. The spoon clattered against the bowl. Her free hand flew to her mouth. Tears ran down her face, sudden and fast, as if a pressure had been building for years and had finally found its exit. It's so cold, she whispered. Then she was crying for real, the way a person cries when they have stopped caring whether anyone is watching. Dale looked at Corporal Marsh with alarm. Did I do something wrong?
Greta stepped forward before she had decided to. I'll have some. Her own voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Dale handed her a bowl. Strawberry and vanilla swirled together, already softening at the edges, a drop sliding down and landing cold on her wrist. The cold came first. Shockingly cold, a cold she had forgotten existed inside this Louisiana furnace. Then the sweetness. Real sugar. Not the chemical substitute that had passed for sweetness for 3 years. Then the flavor arrived underneath all of it. Strawberry. Bright and faintly artificial, and also somehow deeply and completely true. She closed her eyes. Her mother's kitchen in Cone. A summer Sunday 3 years before the war. Fresh strawberries in a white ceramic bowl. Cream so thick it moved slowly. Her brother Frederick across the table, 17 years old, eating too fast cream on his upper lip. He refused to wipe away because it made their mother laugh. Frederick died on the Eastern Front in 1944. He was 20 years old. Greta opened her eyes. The bowl in her hands was already melting into something soft and formless. She took another spoonful. She did not cry. But something had shifted, something she could not name, and she understood with a clarity that had nothing to do with temperature, that she would be thinking about this moment for the rest of her life. She looked at Dale, who was watching her with the bewildered expression of a man who had stumbled into something he had no context to understand. No, she said quietly. You did something kind. That's the problem. Dale stared at her. I don't, he started. I know, Greta said, and turned back to her bowl. From the window of his office at the far end of the compound, Sergeant Henning watched. He had been standing there since the cart appeared, coffee cup in hand, observing the 37 women of Block B encounter what his supply requisition form had described as seasonal morale provision. He had approved that form without thinking twice. He had not expected to find himself standing at this window, unable to look away. He watched Liesel cry and recover and cry again. He watched Hannelore take her bowl, sit on the ground without ceremony, and eat with the focused determination of someone completing an important task. He watched Ingrid stand apart from all of it, arms folded, eyes moving between the cart and the women, never approaching, never fully looking away. He opened his administrative journal and wrote one line. July 28th. Ice cream distribution, Block B. Prisoner response, unexpected. Note for follow-up. He stared at what he had written. Then he closed the journal without adding anything else. By the time the cart had nearly emptied, most of the women had come forward, some twice, some 3 times. Liesel sat on the barrack steps, eating slowly now, the bowl cradled in both hands. Hannelore had returned for a 3rd serving, and was scraping every last trace from the bowl with quiet thoroughness. A few women who had eaten nothing stood near the others, silent, watching the cart with expressions Greta could not fully read. Ingrid had not moved. She stood exactly where she had been standing since the cart appeared. Spine straight, arms folded, her face set in the expression of someone who has made a decision and intends to honor it, no matter the cost. But her eyes kept returning to the cart. Greta noticed this. She noticed it the way you notice something about a person who is performing an emotion they do not entirely feel anymore. That evening, after the cart had been wheeled away and the women had returned to their routines, Ingrid's composure cracked along a line no one expected. She did not cry. She did not shout. She said in a flat voice that cut straight through the low conversations of the barracks, "My daughters in Berlin are eating potato peels tonight, if they are lucky. And today, I watched you eat strawberry ice cream as if it were nothing." The barracks went silent. No one answered her. The truth sat in the room like something uninvited that could not be removed. They were eating better as prisoners of a defeated enemy than their own families were eating as free citizens of a defeated country. Greta lay on her bunk that night and listened to the camp settling into darkness. She could hear Liesel's breathing nearby, still slightly uneven, still carrying the weight of the afternoon. She could hear American voices somewhere outside, laughing about something she could not make out. She picked up her diary and uncapped her pen. July 28, 1945. They gave us ice cream today, strawberry and vanilla. I do not know how to explain what happened. Liesel cried so hard she got hiccups. Hannelore ate 3 bowls and could not speak for an hour. Even I. She stopped writing. What had happened to her exactly? The ice cream had been cold and sweet and perfect. She had thought of Friedrich. She had not cried. And yet something had moved inside her that she could not name, something that had nothing to do with the taste itself and everything to do with the fact of it, the casualness of it, the ordinariness of a young soldier pushing a white cart across a compound on a Thursday morning because the Geneva Convention entitled prisoners to morale provisions, and it happened to be hot outside. She put down her pen and stared at the ceiling. The war had been over for 3 months. She had spent the first month of captivity bracing for punishment. Not because she believed the Americans were monsters, but because she had been told they were repeatedly with great confidence by people who had no framework left for any alternative. The food had surprised her. The space had surprised her. The mechanical precision with which the rules were followed had surprised her more than anything else. But the ice cream was different from all of that. The food could be explained as pragmatism, the rules as legal obligation. The ice cream was not obligatory. The ice cream was simply given the way you give something to a person when you have enough and you can see that they do not. She did not finish the thought that night. She was not ready. But something had started. The following week, Sergeant Henning called Greta into his office. She had been told only that the camp commander wanted to speak with her, and she spent the long walk across the compound, cataloging reasons why this might be true, finding none of them reassuring. His office was small and hot. A wooden desk buried in organized disorder, 2 chairs, a window, facing the eastern half of the compound. Henning was already standing when she entered. "You speak English well," he said. It was not a question. "I studied at Heidelberg before Cone," Greta said. "I know. Your file is thorough." He sat. "I want to ask you something directly, Miss Lindqvist. We have technical documents related to communications equipment we would find useful to have translated. I wonder if you would be willing to assist." Greta looked at him steadily. "Would that be a violation of the Geneva Convention?" A pause. Not long, but complete. Henning's expression shifted in a way that was difficult to categorize, containing elements of offense and something close to amusement at once. "Yes," he said. "It would be. I wanted to see if you knew that." Greta said nothing. "You can go, Miss Lindqvist." She stood and walked to the door, and then, because something in the exchange had opened a door she had not expected, she stopped without turning around. "Sergeant, why does it matter to you whether we know our rights?" The question hung in the small room. Henning was quiet for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was level, in the way voices become level when they are carrying something heavy and have learned to carry it without letting it show. "Because I once did not know mine," he said. "And no one told me." He did not explain further. Greta did not ask. She walked back across the compound in the Louisiana heat, carrying a feeling she could not name, something between unease and an unwelcome respect. And she turned the exchange over in her mind for the rest of the day without arriving anywhere familiar. That night, she wrote in her diary again, "The camp commander knows the rules better than we do. He wanted to see if I knew them too. I was taught that the answer to why they treat us this way was weakness or deception. I am starting to think the answer might be something else entirely, and I do not yet know what that means for everything I believed before I came here." She capped her pen. Outside, the Louisiana night was loud with insects and heat. Somewhere in this same camp, a young soldier named Dale Hutchins sat with a small notebook open on his knee, trying to understand why 37 women had cried over a bowl of ice cream. Somewhere else, an older soldier named Walter Henning sat alone at his desk in the dark, not sleeping, thinking about a boy named James somewhere in the Pacific, hoping that whoever held power over his son's life was the kind of man who signed his forms without asking how he felt about them. None of them knew yet what the summer would teach them, but it had already begun. 3 days later, the cart came back. This time, Dale carried a small notebook in his breast pocket. Greta noticed it immediately, the way you notice something that does not belong, a detail slightly out of place in an otherwise familiar scene. He pushed the cart through the gate with the same easy stride, the same sunburned calm,
but his eyes moved differently than they had on Thursday. He was watching now, not the way a guard watches measuring threat and distance, the way a person watches when they are trying to understand something they cannot yet explain.
The flavors were different this time: chocolate, vanilla, and something Dale announced in his broken German as butter pecan, a combination of words that meant nothing to the women and produced a moment of collective confusion until he held up a spoonful to demonstrate. Liesel came forward first without hesitation, this time without the tentative approach of 3 days before. She chose vanilla and carried her bowl to the same corner of the steps where she had sat before. She did not cry this time. She closed her eyes and ate slowly with a concentration that looked almost like prayer. Hannelore took chocolate, sat on the same patch of ground she had claimed the first time, and ate with the same systematic thoroughness. When she finished, she stood, walked back to Dale without a word, and held out her empty bowl. He refilled it without comment. Greta chose chocolate. The color alone was something dark and rich, almost black in its depth. Nothing like the waxy substance that had passed for chocolate in Germany during the final years of the war. This was the real thing. She took the first bite and let it coat her tongue, completely cold and sweet, and faintly bitter all at once, a flavor with actual complexity to it. She stood in the narrow strip of shade beside the barracks and ate without thinking about Frederick, without thinking about Köln, without thinking about anything at all. She simply tasted it. She realized standing there that this in itself was its own kind of progress. Ingrid did not approach the cart. Dale finished serving the last of the women and stood for a moment cleaning the scoop against the edge of the cart. Then he looked over at Greta, still standing in her strip of shade with an empty bowl in her hands. "Miss Lindqvist," he said, saying her name carefully, the way people say names they have looked up rather than heard. "On Thursday, you said something to me. You said I did something kind, and that was the problem." He paused. "I have been thinking about that for 3 days, and I still do not understand it." Greta looked at him. He was 22 years old, and he was asking an honest question, and she decided for a reason she could not have fully explained to give him an honest answer. "Do you have brothers or sisters?" she asked. "One brother. Danny. He's in the Pacific." Something moved across Dale's face when he said it. Quick and controlled, the expression of someone who has learned to mention a frightening thing without letting himself dwell on it. "If one day you discovered that everything you had been taught about the world was wrong," Greta said, and the first proof of that was a spoonful of chocolate ice cream. "Would you cry or would you not?" Dale was quiet for a long moment. A fly landed on the rim of the empty cart, and he watched it without moving. "I think I would need to sit with that for a while," he said finally. "Yes," Greta said, "that is what we are doing." He took out his small notebook and wrote something in it as she walked away. That evening, Dale brought the notebook to Henning's office and left it on the desk without being asked. Henning found it when he returned from the evening inspection. He sat down, poured himself a glass of water, and opened it. The entries were brief, factual in the way only someone without the vocabulary for what they are witnessing can be factual. Liesel B. Vanilla. No crying this time. Eyes closed, very still. Hannelore K. Chocolate. 2 bowls again. Same spot on the ground. Greta L. Chocolate. Stood alone. Ingrid F. Did not approach. At the bottom of the page, Dale had written a line that was not an observation, but a question. Why does ice cream do what an interrogation never could? Henning read that line twice. Then he turned back to the previous page and found the entry from Thursday. Greta L. did not cry, but eyes looking at something that was not there. Said you did something kind. That is the problem. He closed the notebook. He sat for a long time in the heat of his office with the window open, the Louisiana night drifting in, carrying the smell of pine and red clay. He thought about the Argonne forest in 1918, which he did not allow himself to think about often because it cost him sleep when he did. He thought about a German prisoner no older than 18, sitting in the mud of a captured trench with his hands behind his head. He thought about the soldier beside him, a man named Walter Briggs from Pennsylvania, who had reached into his coat and produced a bar of chocolate and handed it to the prisoner without a word. The prisoner had taken it, had looked at it for a moment as if it might be a trap. Then he had eaten it, and he had cried in the specific way people cry when they have been frightened for so long that the first moment of safety becomes indistinguishable from grief. Henning had been 17 years old. He had not understood it. He was 42 now. He picked up his administrative journal and wrote continue weekly ice cream distribution, Block B standard provisions. He did not write anything else. The following morning, he called Dale into his office. Dale entered, straight back to the prepared posture of a young soldier summoned by a superior who does not yet know why. Henning gestured to the chair. Dale sat. I read your notebook, Henning said. Dale said nothing. He was waiting to find out whether this was a problem. You have been documenting the prisoner's responses to the provisions, Henning said. Yes, sir. Why? Dale met his eyes. Because I do not understand what I am seeing, sir. And I was told that when you do not understand something, you write it down until you do. Henning was quiet for a moment. You know what some of those women were part of, soldier? Yes, sir. I know. And you are still curious about them. Danny is in the Pacific, sir. Dale said, the same quick, controlled flinch crossing his face again. I do not know what is happening to him out there. I do not know if anyone is curious about him. I think I am writing this down because I want someone to be. The office went very quiet. Outside, the morning work details were assembling the sounds of the camp, organizing itself into another ordinary day. Henning looked at the young man across from him for a long moment. He thought carefully about what he was about to say. I lost my brother at the Argonne, he said. 1918. He was 19. He paused. I know what it is to wait for information that does not come. Dale did not speak. Keep your notebook, Henning said, but keep it in your pocket, not on my desk.
Dale stood, nodded once, and left. Henning watched the door close, then turned to his window. The question at the bottom of Dale's notebook stayed with him. Why does ice cream do what an interrogation never could? He had been turning it over for weeks. Now, sitting at his desk, he thought he was beginning to understand the answer. He was not yet certain he was comfortable with it.
August passed. The cart appeared twice more. The women of Block B developed preferences, debated them, and in doing so began, almost without noticing, to become something other than a single collective mass. They became individuals with opinions about dessert, which is a small thing, and also not a small thing at all. One afternoon in late August, a group gathered under the shade of the equipment shed. Gisela Hoffmann, a former secretary from Stuttgart, who had arrived 3 weeks after Greta and formed strong opinions quickly, was arguing the case for butter pecan with the conviction of someone defending a legal position. The nuts changed the entire experience, she said. Without them, it is only sweetness. With them, it becomes interesting. Vanilla is honest, Liesel said from her spot on the ground, her back against the shed wall. You can taste everything. Nothing is hidden. Chocolate is the only serious choice, Hannelore said. This was less a contribution to the debate than a ruling. Corporal Marsh stood nearby, officially supervising the recreation period, unofficially listening. Without looking up from the clipboard, she was pretending to consult. She said, the entire point of butter pecan is the texture. That is what makes it worth arguing about. The conversation continued, specific and genuine, the way conversations about small pleasures become genuine only after the people having them have gone without pleasure for a very long time. Greta sat slightly apart, listening, feeling the strange distance between what the scene looked like and what it actually meant. Women who had served the machinery of the Third Reich discussing ice cream flavors with an American guard, as if the entire category of enemy had temporarily ceased to apply. She was thinking about this when Ingrid appeared at the edge of the group. She had come, as she often did now, not to join the women, but to watch them from a closer distance than her pride usually allowed, drawn despite herself toward whatever it was that kept happening near that cart. Ingrid had been keeping her distance for weeks, present but separate, like a ship that has not decided whether to come into port. She stood now with her arms folded in the posture Greta had come to recognize as armor, and she looked at the women sitting in the shade with an expression that had shifted since July. It was no longer pure contempt. There was something else in it now. Something raw. You should be ashamed, Ingrid said. Her voice was level and it carried. The conversation stopped. Sitting here discussing ice cream preferences as though you were at a cafe in peacetime, while German children starve, while our cities are rubble, while everything we sacrificed turns to ash. Liesel went pale. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Hannelore set down the small pebble she had been turning in her fingers. She stood slowly shorter than Ingrid by several inches, but something in the way she stood made that irrelevant.
"What would you have us do?" she said. It was not a question the way she said it. "Preserve some dignity. Refuse to participate in their comfort rituals. Show them we cannot be bought. You think strawberry ice cream is the price of our dignity. I think accepting gifts from our captors is the beginning of something." "The beginning of what?"
Seeing clearly, Hannelore said. Her voice did not rise, which somehow made it more effective. "We already lost Ingrid, completely, without qualification. The only question left is what we are going to do now that we are standing in the ash." Ingrid's face went rigid. "You are a traitor to everything we built. What we built is ash," Hannelore said. "You said so yourself." Ingrid turned and walked away without responding, spine straight, refusing to give any further part of herself to the argument. Greta watched her go and felt something that surprised her. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something closer to grief. Ingrid was holding on to the certainty of the old world because releasing it meant facing something far larger than defeat. It meant facing the possibility that the defeat had been deserved. Greta did not feel superior to her. She felt instead that she was looking at a version of herself from 3 months earlier, standing at the edge of a truth she had not yet been ready to enter. That night, she could not sleep. She had been in this country 4 months. She had received no letters from home. She had no way of knowing whether her mother was alive, whether the apartment building on Lindenstrasse still stood, whether the city she had grown up in retained any shape she would still recognize. She had been fed well treated correctly, given ice cream twice a week, and none of it answered the question that sat on her chest at 2 a.m. and refused to move until dawn. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. It came through Red Cross channels, thin and slightly damaged at one corner, her mother's handwriting on the outside in ink that had run. Greta took it from Corporal Marsh's hands and carried it to her bunk and sat with it a full minute before opening it. Her mother wrote carefully, choosing words the way a person chooses footing on ice, testing each one before committing weight to it. The city had changed. There had been difficulties with food distribution. The building on Lindenstrasse had lost 2 of its upper floors, but the ground and first levels remained intact and livable. Several neighbors had not returned. Her mother was managing. She and an older woman from the floor above had developed a system for sharing whatever they had. At the very end, in smaller writing, as if added after the letter was already finished. I hope you are being treated well. I hope you have enough to eat. I worry about you without stopping. Greta sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. She thought about chocolate ice cream. She thought about the mess hall dinner she had eaten 4 hours earlier. She thought about Hannelore eating 3 bowls and scraping the bottom with her spoon, and about her mother developing a system for sharing food with a neighbor, which was simply another word for hunger, and about the 5 months it had taken a letter to travel from Cone to Louisiana. She took out her diary. I received a letter from home today. Mama is alive. The apartment is partially standing. She writes carefully the way you write when the truth is too heavy to put down directly.
She hopes I have enough to eat. She stopped writing. She thought about what she could put in her reply. She had enough. She had considerably more than enough. She could not write that. Between her mother's reality and her own had no road running through it.
She wrote instead, I am well. The Americans follow the rules. I have enough to eat. She sealed the letter. Every word of it was true. None of it was sufficient. 2 days later, Sergeant Henning received his own piece of paper. Corporal Marsh brought it to him during the afternoon inspection, a telegram which meant it had not waited for the slower channels. Henning took it, read it again, folded it in half along the existing crease, and placed it inside his jacket against his chest. He completed the remainder of the afternoon inspection without changing his expression or his pace. That evening, he sat at his desk and took the telegram out and unfolded it again as if it might have changed. It had not. James Henning, Private First Class, United States Marine Corps, killed in action, Okinawa, June 1945. The notification had taken 4 months to reach him. He sat with this for a long time. Outside the camp moved through its evening routines the ordinary sounds of men and women surviving another day. He could hear low voices from the direction of Block B, indistinct. He opened his administrative journal, found the page for the following week's supply requisitions, and signed the line for ice cream distribution, Block B, without pausing. He closed the journal. Corporal Marsh knocked and entered without waiting the custom between them after 11 months. She looked at him and understood immediately the way people understand things they have been dreading. She said nothing. Geneva Convention does not have a provision for personal bereavement, Henning said. No, sir. Good. Then there is nothing to discuss. Marsh stood a moment longer, then nodded and left. Henning turned to his window. Block B was quiet now, barracks lights visible in the Louisiana dusk. 37 women in there, each one carrying her own version of the weight he was carrying tonight. He thought about the question Dale had written in his notebook. Why does ice cream do what an interrogation never could? He had been turning it over for weeks. Now, sitting with the telegram pressed against his chest, the answer arrived almost fully formed, and it was not comfortable. It was the kind of answer that changes the shape of everything you thought you understood. Dale learned about James the following morning from Corporal Marsh. He stood very still when she told him. He looked toward Henning's office for a long moment. Then he looked toward Block B. He took out his notebook and wrote one line. Sergeant Henning lost his son. He signed the ice cream order this morning. He put the notebook away and did not take it out again that day. He did not know that Greta had seen him from across the compound, standing with that particular stillness, looking between the office and the barracks. He did not know that she had recognized the quality of that stillness because she had worn it herself on the day she learned about Frederic. She did not go to him. There was nothing yet to say.
But that night, for the first time, she found herself thinking not about what the Americans had taken from her, and not about what they had given her, but about what it had cost them to give it. That thought, quiet and unexpected, changed something in the way she understood what she was living through. She did not write it in her diary. Some things are too new to put into words, but it was there settled somewhere beneath language, patient, waiting for the moment when she would be ready to look at it directly.
November came to Camp Whitfield the way November comes to Louisiana. Not with cold, but with a slight softening of the heat, a change in the quality of light that suggested the world was considering the idea of autumn without fully committing to it. The pine forest beyond the fence shifted almost imperceptibly. The humidity loosened its grip by a fraction. In the evenings, it became almost bearable to sit outside. Greta was sitting outside when Ingrid came and sat beside her. This had not happened before. In 4 months, they had occupied the same spaces, eaten at the same tables, worked in the same compound, and maintained between them the careful distance of two people who had chosen different responses to the same catastrophe. Greta looked at the older woman settling onto the bench and said nothing because nothing seemed required yet. Ingrid was quiet for a long time. She was looking at the fence line, at the pine trees beyond it, dark shapes against the fading sky. You believe that understanding the truth will make you feel better, Ingrid said finally. It was not a question. It was the observation of someone who had been watching and had already reached a conclusion. Greta considered this carefully. I think I believe it is necessary, she said. Whether it makes anything better is a different question. I know the truth now, Ingrid said. I have known it for 4 weeks, since the letter from my daughter. She paused. It does not make me feel better. It makes my husband's death meaningless. The words landed without drama, which made them heavier. My brother's name was Frederick, Greta said. She had not planned to say it. Eastern Front, 1944. He was 20 years old. Ingrid turned and looked at her. It was the first time in 4 months the older woman had looked at her as a person rather than as a representative of a position. The truth does not make Frederick's death meaningful. Greta continued, her voice level because she needed it to be. It makes it worse. He died for a lie. That is not comfort. That is a specific kind of pain that has no bottom to it. They sat together in the Louisiana dusk. 2 women from the same country, carrying the same unbearable weight from opposite directions. The silence between them was different from any silence they had shared before. It was not the silence of opposition. It was the silence of people who have arrived at the same wreckage by different roads. Then why do you continue? Ingrid asked. Why do you keep choosing to see it clearly if it costs this much? Greta thought about this longer than she expected to need. Because I cannot unknow it, she said at last. I tried in the beginning. You cannot put it back. So the only direction left is forward, even when forward is harder. Ingrid said nothing, but she did not stand up and leave, which was its own kind of answer. They sat there until the bell rang for evening count, then walked back to the barracks separately the way they always had. But something had moved between them, something significant and unnamed, and both of them knew it. January arrived with a particular cruelty. The mail came on a Tuesday, sorted and distributed by Corporal Marsh in the barracks common area. Ingrid received a letter from her daughter in Berlin. Greta watched her take it, watched her turn to face the wall the way people face walls when they need a moment of privacy in a place where privacy does not exist. Ingrid stood there a long time. When she turned back, the letter was folded in her hand, and her face carried the quality of someone who had been somewhere and returned changed. The next morning, the ice cream cart appeared in the compound. Dale pushed it through the gate at the usual hour. Chocolate, vanilla, a new flavor he called peppermint chip. The women came forward in the established pattern. Liesel first, then Hannelore, then Gisela, and the others. Ingrid walked to the back of the line. She stood with her arms at her sides, not folded, and moved forward as the line moved. When she reached Dale, she said nothing. She pointed briefly at the vanilla and accepted the small bowl he gave her. She walked to the far end of the barrack steps away from the other women and sat down. She closed her eyes. She ate the entire bowl with her eyes closed. When she finished, she held the empty bowl in her lap and did not move for a long time. Greta did not approach her. Some things need their space. That evening, Ingrid did something none of them expected. Without announcement, without explanation, she crossed the barracks floor to where Liesel sat mending a torn sleeve and lowered herself onto the bench beside her. Liesel went still, the needle frozen mid-stitch. Ingrid did not apologize for August for the words thrown across the shade of the equipment shed that had left Liesel pale and shaking. She did not use the word sorry. She simply reached over, took the sleeve from Liesel's hands without asking, and began to stitch the last few inches herself, her fingers slow but certain the gesture, saying what her mouth could not yet manage. Liesel watched her for a long moment and then let her keep sewing. They sat together for the better part of an hour, the needle moving in small silver arcs, neither of them speaking. Whatever had been broken between them was not repaired in that hour, but something was acknowledged, stitched as plainly as the sleeve itself, and Greta, watching from across the room, understood that acknowledgement was often the only honest beginning available to anyone. Sergeant Henning called Greta to his office for the second time in mid-January. She crossed the compound in the thin winter light and noticed that the camp felt different in January than it had in July. Not in its structures, but in its texture, as though the long months had worn something into the air itself. She knocked on the open door, and he looked up from his desk. Dale's notebook sat on the desk between them. "Sit down, Miss Lindqvist." She sat. He did not make her wait through administrative preamble.
He opened the notebook to a specific page and turned it to face her. "You can read that." She read it. Dale's small, careful handwriting observations from July through October. She found her own entry quickly. Greta L. did not cry, eyes looking at something that was not there. And lower on the page, the question that was not really a question. Why does ice cream do what an interrogation never could?
She set the notebook down. Henning looked at her steadily. "I lost my son at Okinawa," he said. "June. I received notification in October." Greta was quiet. "His name was James Henning," continued. "He was 19 years old, the same age my brother was when he died at the Argonne." He said this without self-pity, the way a person states a fact they have looked at long enough that the looking no longer destroys them. "I signed the ice cream distribution order the morning I received the telegram," he said. "I want to tell you why. Because I have been carrying it for 3 months, and I think you are the only person in this camp who will understand it." She waited. "When I was 17 years old in a trench at the Argonne, a soldier beside me gave a German prisoner a bar of chocolate. The prisoner cried. I did not understand it at the time." Henning turned his pen over once, twice. "I spent 27 years not understanding it. Then I read this notebook, and I understood it. And I understood something else as well, which is that the rules I have followed my entire career are not only rules, they are the answer to a question every soldier has to answer for himself. What kind of man he is going to be when no one is requiring him to be anything in particular." Greta did not speak. She was listening with the full attention of someone who knows they are hearing something they will need to remember. "I signed the ice cream order the morning I lost James," he said, "because I want to believe that wherever my son was held, the man in charge of that place was also the kind of man who signed the order. Not because the rules required it, because he had decided long before the crisis arrived who he was going to be." The office was completely silent. Greta thought about what she wanted to say and discarded several versions of it. Then she said the true thing. "My brother's name was Frederick," she said. "He was 20 when he died." She paused. "I have been in this camp 9 months, Sergeant Henning. I arrived believing that correctness was a performance, that the food and the provisions and the rules were a demonstration for the international community and would stop the moment observation stopped." She looked at him directly. "I was wrong, and I know I was wrong not because of any argument. I know it because of ice cream on a Thursday." Henning was quiet a moment. Then he said, "Private Hutchins asked a question in his notebook. He asked why ice cream does what an interrogation never could. What is the answer?" "Because an interrogation tells a person what you want from them," Henning said. "Ice cream tells them who you are." Greta sat with that. It was the most precise thing anyone had said to her about the last months at Camp Whitfield. She stood to leave. At the door she stopped, and the question came out before she had decided to ask it. Sergeant Henning, after everything, why did you still sign the order that morning? He looked at her. Because James was somewhere in the Pacific, and I wanted the universe to be the kind of place where someone signed that order for him too, even if it did not happen. He paused, especially if it was too late. Greta nodded once and walked back across the compound. The winter light was thin and pale. The pine trees beyond the fence stood dark and still. She breathed the cold air and felt something settle inside her, some long-held tension beginning to release. Not because anything had been resolved, but because she had finally found the right frame for what she was living through. February came, and with it, the orders for repatriation. Greta's group was scheduled for transport in the second week of the month. The news moved through Block B with the complicated emotional weather of something long anticipated. Relief and grief tangled together, and beneath both the particular anxiety of people who have adjusted to one form of existence and are now being asked to return to another, they are no longer certain they recognize. On the last day, the ice cream cart came one final time. Dale pushed it through the gate at the same hour he always had. For a moment, just the length of a breath, it was July again, and the cart was white against the summer heat, and none of them yet knew what the next 7 months would teach them. Then the moment passed, and it was February, and the light was thin, and they were going home. Last call for ice cream before you go home, ladies, Dale said in his careful, practiced German. His voice was steady. His eyes were not entirely steady. Greta chose vanilla. She understood now why Liesel had defended it all those months ago. There was nothing to hide behind, nothing to explain or justify. Just the clean, cold sweetness of a thing that was exactly what it was. She ate it slowly, standing in the February light, and let herself feel all of it at once. The cold that no longer shocked her, but still comforted her. The sweetness that no longer overwhelmed her, but simply satisfied. The memory of Frederick, which would always be there, which she no longer tried to keep away. The face of her mother in the kitchen on Lindenstrasse. The conversation in Henning's office. Around her, the women of Block B ate their final American ice cream in a quiet that was not emptiness, but fullness. Hannelore ate butter pecan with the considered attention of someone taking careful inventory. Liesel stood with her vanilla eyes closed, tears slow and deliberate, this time a quieter kind of crying than the one that had announced her that first July morning. Gisela ate chocolate and did not debate the point with anyone. Ingrid stood in the line. She took her bowl without a word. Chocolate this time. She ate it standing apart from the others in her habitual position, but the distance was different now. It was no longer the distance of refusal. It was the distance of someone who still needs a little more room than the others. She finished the bowl and held it in both hands for a moment, looking down at it. From his office window, Henning watched. Dale came to stand beside Greta as she finished. He looked out at the assembled women in the compound, all of them suspended in this strange interval between what had been and what was coming. "It looks different from July," he said. "We are different from July," Greta said. He nodded. He had his notebook in his pocket, but he did not take it out. Some things did not need to be written down to be preserved. Sergeant Henning, Greta said. "How is he?" Dale was quiet a moment. "He signed the order for today himself," he said. "Came down to the supply room and signed it in person instead of sending Corporal Marsh. I do not know why he did it that way." Greta looked up at the office window. Henning was there, a still figure in the pale light, watching. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she raised her bowl, a small and simple gesture, one person acknowledging another across the compound. Henning did not move for a moment. Then he raised his coffee cup. That was all. It was enough. The journey home took 3 weeks. A ship to Le Havre, then trains through France and into the occupied zones. They crossed into Germany on a gray March morning. Cities she had once known as solid and permanent had become gaps and rubble, familiar skylines replaced by open sky where buildings had stood for centuries. Stuttgart had survived better than most. Her mother opened the door within seconds of Greta's knock and pulled her inside, without a word, holding her with the grip of someone who had been practicing this exact moment for 9 months and did not intend to release it quickly. Her mother was thinner. Her hands were cold in a way that had less to do with the season than with insufficient food over a long stretch of time. But she was alive, and the apartment was standing, and when Greta sat across from her at the kitchen table, she felt the particular gratitude of someone who had not been certain this moment would happen. "Were they terrible?" her mother asked. "The Americans." Greta looked at the lines that had deepened in her mother's face at the hollows that had not been there before, and thought carefully about how to answer a question that simple with a truth that was not simple at all. "No," she said. "They followed the rules. They were careful with us." Her mother's shoulders dropped slightly, releasing a tension held for 9 months. "Good. I worried after everything we were told during the war about how they would treat prisoners. Mama Greta said everything we were told was a lie." The words were quiet and plain. Her mother received them silently, looking at her daughter across the table for a long moment. Then she looked down at her own hands, and when she looked up again, something had passed through her expression and left a new one behind the face of a person who has accepted a terrible thing and is now learning to live on the other side of it. A week later, Greta stood in a queue for food ration cards. The line moved slowly. The woman ahead of her complained to no one in particular about the occupying forces taking everything about the injustice of the defeated being made to suffer further for the failures of their leaders. Greta said nothing. She thought about vanilla ice cream in the February light, about a sergeant who had signed an order the morning he received the worst news of his life, about a 22-year-old soldier who had written down what he did not understand because someone had once told him
That was how a person begins to understand anything. She moved forward in the line as it moved, and she carried what she knew, and she waited for the day she would learn how to use it.
That day came sooner than she expected. In the autumn of 1945, she was offered a teaching position at a gymnasium in Stuttgart history, and civic students aged 14 to 18, a generation that had grown up inside the lie and would spend the rest of their lives working out what it had cost them. She accepted. She spent 35 years in that classroom. She was a good teacher in the way that matters most, which is to say, she did not give her students comfortable answers, and she did not pretend the past was settled. She taught them the facts, and then she taught them to sit with the discomfort of questions that do not resolve cleanly, which is the hardest thing to teach and the most necessary. Once a year, always in July, always on a day when the heat in Stuttgart reached the particular oppressive stillness that reminded her of Louisiana, she stopped the regular lesson. She told them about a white cart and the sound of metal against metal and cold vapor rising into summer heat. She told them about a 19-year-old woman who cried because something was cold. She told them about a man who signed a paper the morning his world ended because he had decided long before that morning who he intended to be. She told them about a coffee cup raised in a window and what that small gesture had contained. Her students were always quiet when she finished. Not the quiet of boredom, but the quiet of something received. The ice cream was not a kindness, she told them every year in nearly the same words because some things need to be said exactly. It was a Tuesday, and the fact that it was simply Tuesday, that there was no occasion, required no special justification, that it was ordinary. That is what told me everything I needed to know about what we had been fighting. Not weakness, not decadence. Something that could afford to be ordinary about it. Then she would pause and she would let them sit with it. Greta Lindqvist taught her last class in the spring of 1989. She retired that June healthy but tired in the way of someone who has done the work they came to do and is finally ready to put it down. She died in October of that year. Quietly in the apartment on Lindenstrasse that her mother had held on to through everything. She did not live to see the 9th of November, 1989, when the wall dividing her city and her country and her century finally came down. She missed it by 6 weeks. In her will, she left her diary to the Stuttgart City Archives. It rests there now in a temperature-controlled room alongside other fragile documents of the period handled by archivists wearing cotton gloves. The entry for July 28, 1945, carries a small drawing in the margin, a pencil sketch, rough and quick, of an ice cream cone. The scoop shaded in uneven pink, where the pencil pressed harder in some places than others. The work of someone drawing not for an audience, but for herself, trying to hold on to something before it dissolved, the way ice cream dissolves in Louisiana heat. Below the drawing,
in careful handwriting that archivists and historians have come to recognize one sentence. Today I learned what losing really means.
What none of the archivists know, because it appears in no document they have found, is that somewhere in Ohio, in a house in a town whose name appears in no history of the war, an old soldier named Walter Henning kept a small notebook on a shelf above his desk until the end of his life. He had not written a word of it. A young private named Dale Hutchins had filled its pages during the summer of 1945 at a camp in northern Louisiana and had given it to Henning on the day the camp finally closed. Henning kept it for 40 years. He read it sometimes, not often, on nights when sleep did not come easily, which were more nights than he ever admitted to anyone. He never knew that on the other side of an ocean, a woman was telling students about vanilla ice cream in February light, and a coffee cup raised in a window. He never knew she had thought of him specifically in the years since, that she had told his story unnamed every July in a classroom in Stuttgart, or that his son James had been preserved in the telling year after year, in a language James never spoke to students who would never know his name. Some connections are not made in the world. They exist anyway. That is the nature of small acts performed with full conviction in moments when no one is watching and nothing is required. They do not need to be witnessed to be real. They do not need to be remembered by the right people to have mattered. An ice cream cart on a Tuesday in July. Cold vapor in summer heat. A man signing an order the morning his heart broke, because that was who he had already decided to be. These things happened. They were enough.